Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Shay Pilnik. I'm the proud founding director of the Emil and Jenny Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Yeshiva University. I wanted to thank you all and to applaud you for being here to celebrate the power of Holocaust education and to recognize Rabbi Berman, our president, Provost Selma Botman, and Emil Fish. Can we give Emil Fish a round of applause? דוד מנהל. And I'm here with Monique Mogyoros, my partner in crime. Monique is actually the co-founder of the Fish Center and the daughter of Emil and Jenny Fish. And she's going to be here tonight to help me interview Nadav Eyal to mitigate our irritating Israeli accents and to first of all read the bio.
Thank you, Shay. Of course. Good evening, Nadav. Good evening, everyone. I'm really grateful that you all could be here, and I'm so grateful that I ordered you the first day of spring. So enjoy. But I'm going to read Nadav's bio now. Very accomplished. Okay, Nadav Eyal is one of Israel's most prominent journalists and a winner of the Sokolov Award, Israel's equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize. He writes columns for Yedidot Achronot and Ynet and is a contributor to the Call Me Back podcast. Beginning on October 7th, 2023, he has focused his work on stories and analysis related to the massacres perpetrated in Israel and the subsequent war in Gaza and the northern border of Israel, including reporting multiple times from the field. He also serves as a senior commentator for Channel 12, one of Israel's 2 commercial channels. Eyal authored the bestseller Revolt, The Worldwide Uprising Against Globalization, which was published in 2021 and has been translated into multiple languages. Throughout his journalistic career, Eyal has extensively covered Middle East affairs, Israel's role in a globalized world, and Washington-Jerusalem relations. Eyal earned an MSc in global politics from the London School of Economics and Political Science with merit as a Chevenim scholar and an LLB from Hebrew University. Eyal is married to Tamar Ish Shalom, a chief anchor for Channel 13 TV in Israel, and they have 3 children.
Okay. Applause to Nadav, yes.
We can wait for the applause to the end, and let's see how it goes. So,
I have a lot of friends here who told me how excited they are to speak to you. So we've actually spoken 3 times over the last 28 years. We spoke today, we spoke a few weeks ago when we were preparing the program, and the one before then was about 28 years ago when Nadav and I both served in the IDF radio. We were in the same base, in the same station. We were maybe a group of 6 people. I was just IT support. I was a technai shidur, a technician, but Nadav was back then. And
Shay, don't minimize that. You did a great job, and we could see that your future is ahead of you.
Not as a technician, that's for sure. Nadav, you and I looked you up. I looked up your autobiography. We share so many commonalities. Youth group, growing up in a secular, middle-class family in Israel. You traveled around the world, which is not unusual for Israelis, but you also wrote about it as a journalist. And now you live in the United States. You've been here for a year and a half. We'll talk about your teaching career here in a moment, the podcast. And I'm curious for you as an Israeli and as a Jew, how all your travels and all the people that you spoke with and met, how has that shaped your perspective?
Wow, this is a big question. First of all, I want to say how happy I am to be here. I was actually this year at the Yeshiva University event, was invited by a person who was actually in the room, Dr. Eric Wolf and his family. It was very nice to meet the Yeshiva University community. I wasn't exposed to it before that. And I knew about what the Fish Center has been doing even before being invited here. So for me, it's really a privilege to be here and to speak about that because my grandfather himself lost his entire family, his wife and his child in the Holocaust and rebuilt his life in Eretz Israel. So I find great meaning in being here today and contributing some of my insights in this evening. To your question, Shay, the way that it shifted my perspective is very much related to the subjects that we're dealing with this evening. I think that there is always a tendency throughout the Jewish world to speak about how close are the Jewish people in Eretz Israel and in the diaspora. We are all one. And I, of course, agree in principle, but I do not agree in our experiences. I grew up in Israel as part of a majority group. I grew up as an Israeli Jew. That meant that I walked through the country as someone who does not feel as a minority, who is not singled out, who does not need to maintain his identity, who is not fearing that his children will not maintain their own identity onwards. So some of the experiences that the Jewish community in this country has, and Jewish communities around the world have, and these experiences are really the experiences that have shaped the Jewish people for thousands of years, is something that I didn't have. It's not only that I did not have that, it's my parents, my grandparents that were born in Eretz Israel. So that's the other side, the side that did not experience the Holocaust. And one of the things that I noticed is the difference in the way that I think, the sensitivities and the sensibilities that I lack and that I can actually learn from the diaspora. And I think this is not discussed enough. And it's very important to think about these things when we are talking specifically about the subjects that are so important with the Fish Center and Holocaust education. It's that identity as a minority that really educated Jews to walk through their own societies and build through their own societies in a certain way and build their communities and their institutions and culture. And it is the state of Israel and we Israelis and Sabras that to a large extent have enjoyed that culture, sometimes not completely recognizing where it came from. It didn't only stem from our history in Eretz Israel, our ancient history in Eretz Israel. It stemmed from the shtetl and from that very basic feeling that Jews who grow up abroad have, that they are not the majority in their societies, and therefore that they live in a very specific condition of fragility. Sometimes you can see that very clearly, I think, and sometimes there are eras in which this fragility becomes actually an attack on their own existence. And unfortunately, this is what we're seeing around the world today. So I didn't give you a full answer as to everything I learned from my travels abroad as an international correspondent, but to my Jewish identity, I think this is one of the most meaningful conclusions that I had.
Oh, I have one, yeah. So Nadav, one of the things that we try to navigate at the Fish Center is our role, the understanding that we are really an institution that studies history. With that, right, we're not first responders to what's playing out in real time, to the idea that, right, there's a really deep connection between the past and the present, and there's a relationship. One of the reasons we wanted you to come speak here today is because we've seen you navigate this balance really well. For many of us, I can speak for myself personally, there have been very difficult times, and we've all listened to you on the Call Me Back website, and you've helped us work through these times. And your approach is really in understanding the importance of Jewish history and the history of the state of Israel. And you really bring a deep analytical and a style and a thoughtful style to helping us navigate these times. So I wanted to ask my first question about, I think, what's on everybody's mind here, which is Iran. And your thoughts about it, both in terms of how you see this war ending and where you see the Middle East in the next year or two.
Yeah. So before I forget, I want to say something about Iran, about the Islamic Republic. If I had an Iranian friend in the room, he would be offended if I would say Iran. He would say, no, the Islamic Republic. And it's not only the country that is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism around the world, it's the country that is the biggest sponsor of Holocaust denial around the world. And it has made that a formal approach of the state, at least at a certain point with President Ahmadinejad that we all remember. By the way, the jury is still out if he was assassinated, if he wasn't assassinated in the first strikes of this war. One could hope for the best result in that regard. What we're seeing today in Iran is a watershed moment for the region, even if the regime maintains its position, which, realistically speaking, we should acknowledge is absolutely a possibility. So you mentioned Call Me Back, and it's really Dan Senor's amazing project and endeavor, and I'm privileged to be part of that. One of the things that I decided when going on Call Me Back, although I'm an Israeli, my mother tongue is Hebrew, I speak to an Israeli audience, so when I speak in English, it's very natural for me to take a defensive mode and explain or do hasbara. I don't do hasbara. People don't invite me to do hasbara. I really appreciate those who do. I do not downplay this. I understand as an Israeli that I want people to speak in my name. It's just not my job. My job is to be a journalist and to bring people sometimes hard truths and bring them with clarity. And of course, try not to be completely overjoyed or panicked about these hard truths. I don't know how this war will end, if this will end with actual regime change in Iran or even with a significant change within the regime. But the regime is already changed by the virtue of Ali Khamenei, who was the #1 oppressor in the world today and the longest serving dictator, gone. And not only he is gone, but also an entire chain of command there is gone. And therefore, change is upon us. Now, how will this change shape itself is an essential question. And what we need to remember about Iran, two important things, I think. The first one is that fanatic as they are still a rational player. Now, that is not to say that they will not endeavor to some things that seem to be completely unreasonable to us. They are rational within the framework that is a framework in which religion and meaning, sacrifice, and unfortunately jihad carries a lot of weight. This is their rationality, and it does operate. The second thing is that the Islamic Republic, since its inception, has based its foundation on the idea that the day will come and Israel and the United States, the big Satan and the little Satan, will endeavor to topple the Islamic regime's power and to take over Iran. This was a narrative. This was a state narrative. So this war is threatening this regime, but also vindicating for the mullahs if they want to push for that idea. This won't help them because it is defunct. The country is defunct. The system isn't working. It's not working if you look at water issues. It's not working in unemployment. It doesn't work in terms of the growth of GDP. The country is just completely lost. And because of that, change will happen in Iran, whether or not they want it or not only because the leader is gone after more than 30 years, but also because the country is bankrupt. Now, the question there is very much strategic, and one should basically divide between our sentiment, which is, for me, an incredibly powerful sentiment against the Islamic Republic, since I know that they have basically ruined much of my and Shay's childhood. You know that nobody's talking about this in this country. Maybe I'll write about this in my next Substack post. This country was very much responsible for the downfall of the Oslo Accords, for the idea that these peace treaties that could have led to a completely different region, that it would collapse because they funded those suicide bombings. They introduced the idea of suicide bombings to some extent into the Israeli spirit. Nobody's talking about that. So I have a lot, and I was there. I was there, and Shay was there. We have these memories. Moving in a country from a country in which a stabbing attack was terrible into a country in which 15 people were killed when a bus exploded was a completely different scene for us. Yet we should keep sort of a cold approach to it and ask ourselves, knowing what we know, having that sentiment towards the Islamic Republic, what would be strategically efficient for change? How do we manufacture change? We need to manufacture and mold this change in a way that will be as positive, or at least less negative, to the interests as Americans for the United States of America, and for Israelis for Israel. And that's a big question. I want to believe that it's discussed by Washington and Jerusalem. As far as I know, to some extent, it is discussed.
So you mentioned Washington and Jerusalem. What do you make of the accusations that this is actually a war made by Israel, where Israel is actually the smaller party that dragged the US into it? And we already see how on social media people are conjuring up this image of Jewish power and a Jewish war, where there's a small group of members of our community who are behind the scenes. And is that a threat? Is it going to grow?
So first of all, it is a threat. Of course, this is, I'm saying this just as someone who's covering this. This is a lie. It's true that Israel thought that Iran is a threat to the region. It's true that Israel wanted to have another go at the Iranian ballistic missiles. But it's also true that the United States could have just said, no, you can't do that, or yes, you can do this, but go on it alone. You don't need our help. And one could only quote what President Trump has said a few days ago. It's not that they twisted my arm, I twisted their arm. This is what the president is saying. He's saying this on the record. Now, one of the problems with these conspiracy theories, and the way, by the way, as a journalist, when someone tells me an incredibly interesting story, we once had a chief editor in Yediot Ahronot, he used to say, this is a fantastic story. Is this also true? Now, I think, so sometimes when I used to train young journalists, and one of the things that I would immediately tell them, when they started telling me that story, I would say, does it make sense? What you're saying, without checking your sources, without cross-checking anything, does it have an internal logic to it? What's the internal logic here? That the president decided to sacrifice his poll numbers, to drag the entire United States, to serve Netanyahu? Because of what? So immediately you meet the wall of anti-Semitism there, of conspiracy theories, of cabal, of different ideas there. After the second sentence, it always would reach these ideas. The Israelis have managed to manipulate an entire generation and generations of decision makers. Now, I covered the negotiations between Ariel Sharon and George W. Bush right before the Iraq War in 2003. I just written about this extensively. I remember traveling with Sharon on his airplane to the United States, to Washington, to meet George W. Bush, and I traveled back with him. I was a diplomatic correspondent back then. And I remember Sharon himself telling me about the Iraq War. This is not the right war. And this was, by the way, verified by people that were part of the administration afterwards in their memoirs, that Israel was not pushing for that war. It's true that Prime Minister Netanyahu, as a private citizen, went to Congress and gave that testimony, which is being aired again and again. But nobody remembers, because nobody remembers anything anymore, that he wasn't the prime minister. He was a private citizen. Sharon, who was the prime minister, and the entire Israeli government distanced itself. It doesn't matter. Israel is constantly blamed that it was behind the Iraq war, and Walter Mearsheimer gave some sort of academic credence to it. Now, here's the difference, and this is what worries me. Israel does think that this is the right war to fight, and it's fighting in the war, unlike in 2003. Side by side, Israel has also been pushing on the record for a regime change. And anti-Semitism has peaked even before the war. And because of that, this is a very sensitive moment. It could be very fragile. And one of the things that I constantly write about in Israel is that you can't think about the diaspora only when you come to A, ask help, or B, when you want to talk about the peoplehood. You need to think about the diaspora when you make decisions. How will this influence half of the Jewish people that aren't in Eretz Israel? What will it mean? I don't think that by saying that, that means that we're weak. I think that it means that we're strong, but it doesn't really matter what I think, because what I just said about making decisions and thinking about the diaspora is paraphrasing David Ben-Gurion. This is what Ben-Gurion thought about how Israel should conduct itself. So I think it's important. In this regard, I think taking out Iran ability is crucial for our survival in the region to the extent that we can, and for the possibility to build a bridge for peace in the region to the extent that we can. But we need to play it smart and strategic.
You mentioned anti-Semitism peaking. Shay and I, a few years ago, went to a global conference on anti-Semitism, where almost the entire conference focused on the left. In recent months, there's been a growing, escalating anti-Semitic rhetoric from the right. And, it's intensified. We see, figures such as Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes increasing in popularity. Now, you saw that threat coming when you produced your documentary in 2015. I think it was A Journey to the Dark Heart of Racism, in which you reported on the rising anti-Semitism in Europe from the right, as well as the exodus of Jews from the continent. You concluded your documentary with a sentence that said that the new Nazis sound just like the old Nazis. Almost a decade has passed since your film. How do you view it? Do you think that it was a foreshadowing of what was to come? Or given the global reaction post-October 7th, did you miss the growing threat coming from the Islamists and the left?
I definitely was focused on the right wing, you're absolutely right, and on racism coming from neo-Nazis and the rest, but I did allow a lot of time to that, asking the questions of if attacking Israel from the left wing, radical, progressive, could be labeled as anti-Semitism, discovering that some of these people are purely anti-Semites. So to the question itself, how do I see this? I see these people, and what happened to their ideas is that these people have not won. Nick Griffin, who I interviewed, the British Nationalist Party back in 2008, he didn't win a seat in the British Parliament. Nobody knows who he is today. And the neo-Nazis I spoke with in Germany, they didn't win either. What happened was much worse. Their ideas won. I remember a conversation with Marine Le Pen in which I told her, I see now the central right wing in France is taking some of your ideas. Marine Le Pen, by the way, was there. I don't want to give the impression, we do not have any statement by Marine Le Pen, unlike Jean-Marie, that places her in the anti-Semite quarter. But I remember Marine Le Pen telling me, I don't care about them adopting my platform. She said that angrily. I want to be the president. I want to win. But this is what happened to the far right everywhere. Far right ideas have made their way to the mainstream. Some people thought that you could put a wall there, that you could say, oh no, that just the right-wing ideas that I like are the ones that are going to zip their way to the mainstream. They didn't understand that hate comes together with hate. This is something that the Jewish community in this country saw long before anyone else. That those people who preach hatred against Jews usually don't only hate the Jews. And it goes the other way around. And this need of a coalition, that was extremely meaningful. Now, as to the progressive radical side, I'm absolutely not going to downplay that this is what we're seeing. What we are seeing is the far right trivializing, downplaying, or outright denying the Holocaust. What we're seeing with the left, the progressive left, radical left, is trying to either use the Holocaust or banalize the Holocaust and instrumentalize it, belittle it, make everything the Holocaust. And that will make the Holocaust completely empty to most people who are consuming these extreme sides, because it is becoming an instrumental vehicle for either trying to make it a relativist form in the left, or completely banalizing it in the right. And that's very dark. And this is exactly what you guys have been fighting against, I guess.
We'll talk about it in a moment. But in the meantime, as we swiftly come towards the end of the program, if you have questions for Nadav, we're going to have a brief Q&A session, but you have to raise your hand, and we have some flashcards and pens or pencils to hand to you. So raise your hand if you have a question for Nadav, and our staff is going to come by you and help you. Nadav, I did not know that you are a grandson of Holocaust survivors. 3 of my grandparents were survivors, and for you it was only one of them?
It's actually a terrible story. My grandfather himself is not a Holocaust survivor. He lost his entire family in the Holocaust. He made Aliyah to Eretz Israel when there were no certificates. He came from Bialystok, and they made a calculated decision that he will come to Eretz Israel on a tourist visa, because the British won't allow, in the late 1930s, they would not allow Jews to come. And they decided to forfeit. You needed to put money to guarantee your return. They decided to forfeit that on purpose. And he started working, and his idea was that he will send the certificate from Israel. And what happened was that he came, and a very short while afterwards, the war broke. And he tried to return during the war through Lebanon back to his family in Poland, and he failed, and he couldn't return back home. So for years, my grandfather heard the news from Europe, wrote letters. I went to the Zionist archive, and they said, we're willing to share the file with you, but you need to see it because it's a sensitive file. It's sensitive also because of the policies of certificates at the time that were extremely political. And I went there and I saw the letters. The last letter that my grandfather wrote, by the way, it's in my English translated book, had one big word in the center, and the word was Hatzilu. Because he understood that his family, even after the war broke, was still alive. Those of you who know history know how Poland was, after the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement was divided. And he wanted to do everything in his power to get the certificate. He couldn't get that, and he didn't know what happened for them for years. So he was totally consumed by this experience of knowing that his family is there and he is in Eretz Israel, his wife and his child. And he went from consulate to consulate asking for that certificate, for that waiver. And this experience of the Jew who is looking for the outside defense, who is looking for the papers, the foreign papers, who is going to the Polish embassy, who is traveling to Beirut to ask for the French to give his family something, only to discover that his family, they probably were murdered in Sobibor. It's not completely clear. And he never wanted to speak about this extensively. He lost his entire family. No one was left, as far as we know, from his entire extended family, absolutely no single one. So this experience is exactly, for me, the Zionist conclusion, that you will never need to go and ask for the favors of others, foreigners, benevolent as they come, that you will have a country of your own. And he did not have that. And this is exactly the reason why his wife and child were murdered, were perished.
So Nadav, you're not a Holocaust educator, you're a journalist. We as Holocaust educators now face both deniers and distorters, and we feel like the deniers, they're more the crazies, we know how to deal with them. But now what we see is Holocaust distortion with the manipulation, the distortion of history, minimizing the number of Jews who were killed, and we see that from both the left and the right. And I wanted to see what your advice to us is as
Never ask a journalist for advice.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah. You can ask for insight, but never ask for advice. It's the wrong way to go. You do
Insight
like,
or reflection about Holocaust education. And I know that you spoke to a lot of young people when you made your documentaries around the world. You also spoke to young people in your book about the revolt against globalization. So I wonder, do you believe in the power of Holocaust education and education at large?
I have a good friend who's an Israeli entrepreneur. He says, never trust other people with the two most important things in your life, the education of your children and your legacy. And he means both the things that you're going to leave for your children. And the answer to the question is, of course, I believe in education. If we don't believe in education, what do we believe in? I talk in Machon Mesu'a, in Bnei Yitzchak in Israel, near Netanya. Each year they invite me to speak with officers. This is what they do, Masu'a. They have officers from the IDF. And one of the things I speak with them about is not the obvious experiences, images of the Holocaust. I think that is very important. But when you ask me about the Nazis, why the neo-Nazis sounded like the old Nazis, there was a conversation there in which they told me, it's all about who won the war. And I said, it doesn't matter who would have won the war, 6 million Jews would have still been dead, and you or your ancestors murdered them. And then the neo-Nazi said, it wouldn't have mattered because no one would have known about it. And that was the old Nazi. That is exactly Nazism. This was an important insight. That minute I understood that he wasn't only a neo-Nazi in his clothes, that he really did the readings. Because if you do the readings, if you look at the speeches, if you look at the Himmler speech and other speech, you understand that this is one of the most essential elements of fascism in general, but specifically Nazism. And this is so contrary to the Jewish experience. The idea that power, physical power, might, is more important than any truth. And everything is relative in that sense. And if everything is that relative, then my group is more important than any other group, and I can do anything, because there is no, as Hitler put it, Jewish morality. So when I speak about, this is my experiences, I am not going to even try to advise you about how to teach people in this country. But my experiences with Israelis is, when I tell them that, when I speak about these experiences, I see them change. I see them understand something. Sometimes understand something about our rivals, our enemies. Sometimes understand something that they should keep in terms of their sensibility as to themselves. And it begins with yourself. And for me, this is very important. And this is the meaning. Now, I wholly support the mission here. I understand the political nature of this mission from a condition in which the Holocaust was completely universalized to the extent that the Jewish experience in it became, and you see sometimes statements and speeches not even mentioning the Jews, talking about in the International Holocaust Day, into a situation in which you need to refocus it. And I support that because I think it's just such a historical deviation. It's a misunderstanding. The Holocaust is very much a Jewish story with universal consequences and implications. But it is not a completely universal story detached from the Jewish experience.
Nadav, you mentioned the Oslo Accords. You were 19 and I was 21, and we got lost in the Arab part of Hebron.
That's
I
right.
think it's an event we both forgot.
Yes.
True story about how much the reality changed.
No, but
But I will turn to the Q&A, and we can only take a couple of questions. Nadav, this is a question from the audience. Why does Israel not do a better job fighting on the marketing and public relations front?
That's a great question. I think that there is no doubt that Israel is deficient in that regard. And you know, as an Israeli, my job, usually people reading my articles in Israel, they don't usually read about Holocaust education. What they read about in my articles is a lot about what's wrong with governance in Israel. This is what I do because I'm a journalist. So there are many, many things that we need to get better in our country. And one of them, just one of them, is the way that Israel presents itself and its case around the world. I will say this, however. To a certain degree, it's very easy to blame the spokespersons and say, you should present it better. What I ask is sometimes, should you policy this better? Should you actually make different decisions to begin with? It's not only about being right. I think that the Zionist endeavor is in the right. It's true to history. I believe in Israel's right to exist and prosper in the region. I also believe that you definitely need to take into account your decisions and the way that international legitimacy is being influenced. Now, how do I know that? Because our founding fathers did that. They understood that this is a country that's going to be founded by the Jews. It's going to be a Jewish country. It's going to be small. It's going to have a lot of enemies. And because they understood that, they also understood they need to be very careful and very, very smart in the decisions they make. And they need always to cultivate popular support. Zionism was always supported by the majority of the public in these places. It didn't happen out of nothing. It was supported by a grassroots movement in the UK, in the US. Most people, most of the time, supported the Zionist idea and that Jews should have a country of their own. So this is essential, and for me, this is the main challenge for Israel today. Legitimacy or delegitimization for Israel is much more of a serious threat than whatever our enemies in the Middle East are planning for us. We can handle them. We have the Israeli Air Force. We'll be fine. But we need really to deal with delegitimization of Israel, and there are a lot of ways to do that. For instance, fighting theoretical notions against Zionism. I think that's extremely important.
So that's actually a good transition to our last question, which also comes from the audience. Do you think that the current government of Israel often thinks about the Jews in exile in decision-making like Ben-Gurion did?
Okay, that's a softball towards the end. I don't think that this government, or by the way, the previous government or previous governments are thinking the way they should be thinking about the diaspora. I think that there is something very anachronistic in the way that the Israeli experience and discourse deals with the diaspora. And here's the good news. It changed after October 7. After October 7, Israelis understood that they were alone, and we were alone. There were no one, nothing on our side. Almost immediately we felt that. But it was communities around the world of people living many thousands of kilometers away that felt affiliated with Israel, that started praying in their shuls for the return of the hostages, that collected money, that traveled to Israel again and again during war, that talked with their kids. And because Israelis were so alone, it was such a time that was transformative, they heard that. And they really were not listening. We were not listening. I was not listening that well before October 7. So this is a time of positive change in that regard. And what people like me need to make sure is that this positive change of consciousness of Israelis transmits into our political life and our decision making. That people understand that it's not about only that we are the same people. We are. or about these slogans, or again about asking for help, or about preaching to Jews abroad that they need to make Aliyah. This needs to move from there. And the way to move from there is to accept the intrinsic importance of the diaspora life for the Jewish experience, and to see the things that bind us together, and also to see the strengths in the diaspora experience that we can learn from. What Israelis felt on the morning of October 7, and I'm saying this as someone who took his kids to the shelter that day, not knowing how the day will end. I just heard a friend who is a very calculated, very experienced person in Israel who said he was thinking about what will he need to do to his family if the terrorists reach his house. So this was the type of thinking. But what Israelis experienced that day was a pogrom. But on massive, massive scale. And they suddenly sensed something. They smelled something. They saw images that were very, very different. And they rang something through their memory that, to some extent, remained more living in the diaspora than it did in Israel. It's not a good thing, but this is what happened. And it connects us. And now we need to make the best of it. I know it's the last question. I want to thank you. I want to say something I say to audiences across this country. I don't know how many opportunities I will have to do that. I'm traveling between Israel and the United States all the time. I think I'm continuing to teach in Colombia with what I do. But I say this in these kind of events. I think that it simply should not be taken for granted that people in this country, Jews and non-Jews, will care so much about a country that is so far away. Even if they're Jewish and they travel for every Pesach and every Rosh Hashanah and they have all their family there, I do not take that for granted. And the thing that me, Israelis, should say more is a word we don't say enough, and that is Todah. And I say this just for myself, of course, but I think many, many Israelis feel the same.
Nadav, we don't take for granted your outstanding journalistic work. So on behalf of me and Monique and the entire Free Center and the YU community, thank you.
Thanks very much.
And if you don't mind going with me for another moment, I wanted to thank all of those who worked so hard on producing this event, and of course, to recognize Rabbi Berman and Provost Selma Botman, Dean Rebecca Saipes, thank you for coming, Susie Myers, to thank the IA team that worked so tirelessly. We have Tracy Rosenblatt and Alison Brooks, Rose Biberman and Danielle Grandridge. And from the Fish Center, I wanted to specially thank Nadine Schatzkes, who pulled off this event. Dr. Karen Sean, who is the mind behind our advanced certificate. Thank you, Dr. Sean. And Brittany Hager McNeely. And thank you all for being with us tonight and for celebrating the power of Holocaust education. Thank you.